Assalamu alaikum students. This is your teacher Muhammad Umar Khattak for the subject Organizational Theory and Behavior. And this is our 8th lecture, Foundations of Individual Behavior, Learning. Learning. What is learning? Learning is any relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience. We can say that changes in behavior indicate that learning has taken place. The concept of learning is theoretical and hence not directly observable. You have seen people in the process of learning. You have seen people who behave in a particular way as a result of learning. And some of you, in fact, I guess the majority of you, have learned at some point in your life. In other words, we infer that learning has taken place if an individual behaves, reacts, responds as a result of experience in a manner different from the way he formerly behaved. Theories of learning. There are three major theories of learning: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, social learning theory. These theories offer to explain the process by which we acquire patterns of behavior. Classical conditioning. Classical conditioning grew out of experiments to teach dogs to salivate in response to the ringing of the bell. These experiments were conducted in the 1900s by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. A simple surgical procedure allowed Pavlov to measure accurately the amount of saliva secreted by a dog. When Pavlov presented the dog with a piece of meat, the dog exhibited a noticeable increase in salivation. When Pavlov withheld the presentation of meat and merely rang a bell, the dog did not salivate. Then Pavlov proceeded to link the meat and the ringing of the bell. After repeated hearing the bell before getting the food, the dog began to salivate as soon as the bell rang. After a while, the dog would salivate merely at the sound of the bell, even if no food was offered. In fact, the dog had learned to respond, that is, to salivate, to the bell. In the experiment, the meat was an unconditioned stimulus. It invariably caused the dog to react in a certain way. This response, secretion of saliva, was called the unconditioned response. The bell was an artificial stimulus and so was called the conditioned stimulus. Although originally neutral, the bell was paired with the meat, an unconditioned stimulus. It eventually produced a response when presented alone, secretion of saliva with only ringing of the bell. Learning a conditioned response involves building up an association between a conditioned stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus. When the stimuli, one compelling and the other one neutral, are paired, the neutral one becomes a conditioned stimulus and hence takes on the properties of the unconditioned stimulus. Classical conditioning can be used to explain why nursery rhymes often bring back memories of childhood and euphoria. Classical conditioning is passive, something happens and we react in a specific way. It is elicited in response to a specific identifiable event. It can be explained as simple reflex behavior. In our organizational settings, we can also see classical conditionings operating. For example, at one manufacturing plant, every time the top executives from the head office were scheduled to make a visit, the plant management would clean up the administrative offices and wash the windows. This went on for years. Eventually, employees would turn on their best behavior and look prim and proper whenever the windows were cleaned. Even in those occasional instances when the cleaning was not paired with a visit from the top brass, people had learned to associate the cleaning of windows with a visit from the head office. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning argues that behavior is a function of its consequence. People learn to behave to get something they want or to avoid something they don't want. Operant behavior means voluntary or learned behavior in contrast to reflexive or unlearned behavior. In operant conditioning, the tendency to repeat the behavior is influenced by reinforcement or lack of reinforcements brought about by the consequence of such behavior. Thus, reinforcement strengthens behavior and increases the likelihood that it will be repeated. What Pavlov did for classical conditioning, B.F Skinner did for operant conditioning. Skinner argued that creating pleasing consequences to follow specific forms of behavior would increase the frequency of that behavior. The concept of operant conditioning was part of Skinner's broader concept of behaviorism, which argues that behavior follows stimuli in a relatively unthinking manner. In Skinner's form of radical behaviorism, concepts such as feelings, thoughts, and other states of mind are rejected as cause of behavior. In short, people learn to associate stimulus and response, but their conscious awareness of this association is irrelevant. He demonstrated that people will most likely engage in desired behavior if they are positively reinforced for doing so. The rewards are most effective if they immediately follow the desired response. That behavior is not rewarded or punished is less likely to be repeated. Any situation in which it is either explicitly stated or implicitly suggested that reinforcement are contingent on some action on your part involves the use of operant conditioning. Your instructor says that if you want a high grade in the course, you must supply correct answers on the test. A commissioned salesperson wanting to earn a sizable income finds that doing so is contingent on generating high sales in his or her territory. Of course, the linkage can also work to teach the individuals to engage in behaviors that work against the best interest of the organization. Assume that your boss tells you that if you will work overtime during the next 3-week busy season, you will be compensated for it at your next performance appraisal. However, when performance appraisal time comes, you find that you are given no positive reinforcements for your overtime work. The next time your boss asks you to work overtime, what will you do? You will probably decline. Your behavior can be explained by operant conditioning. If a behavior fails to be positively enforced, the probability that the behavior will be repeated declines. Social learning theory. Individuals can learn by observing what happens to other people and just by being told about something as well as through direct experiences. Much of what we have learned comes from watching role models like parents, teachers, peers, and media. Social learning theory. The view that we can learn through both observation and direct experiences is called social learning theory. The influence of role model is central to the social learning viewpoint. Toyota Motor Corporation applies social learning theory in teaching employees skills they need to meet the company's high standards of quality and efficiency. at its new Global Production Center training facility in Toyota City, Japan, employees from factories around the world learn production techniques through observation and direct experiences. Trainees first watch computerized visual manuals to learn basic skills. Then, under the tutelage of an experienced production master, they are allowed to practice their skills. Although social learning theory is an extension of operant conditioning, it assumes that behavior is a function of consequences. It also acknowledges the existence of observational learning and the importance of perception in learning. Four processes have been found to determine the influence that a model will have on an individual: attentional processes, retention processes, motor reproduction processes, and reinforcement processes. Attentional processes. People learn from role models only when they recognize and pay attention to its critical features. We tend to be most influenced by role models that are attractive, repeatedly available, important to us, or similar to us in our estimation. Retention processes. A role model's influence depends on how well the individual remembers the role model's action after the role model is no longer readily available. Motor reproduction processes. After the person has seen the new behavior by observing the role model, the watching must be converted to doing. This process then demonstrates that the individual can perform the model activities. Reinforcement processes. Individuals are motivated to exhibit the model behavior if positive incentives or rewards are provided. Behaviors that are positively reinforced are given more attention, learned better, and performed more often. That would be the end. Thank you.